In the year 2003, now all the private operators, people like PickBrain and all these guys, had started using PowerPoint already by the year 2001, right? 2000, 2001, right? And there's a story behind that, right? KQA moved to PowerPoint only in the year 2003. So what is the funda behind all of this? LCD projectors, right? Began arriving in Bangalore, right? By arriving, what I mean is arriving in the sense that institutions could purchase. Right? My college, St. Joseph's, purchased an Epson LCD projector. I wrote the proposal for acquiring the projector, so I remember this. Right, in the year '99, right, we wrote to the UGC, and the UGC gave us a grant to buy this LCD projector and set up an audiovisual room. Till then, our audiovisual room was one television and one set of speakers wired to the television. Right. So the biggest expense in assembling that AV room was the projector itself for us. Right, it cost us 2 lakhs. An Epson projector in those days was 2 lakhs. Right, so colleges couldn't just sort of wake up one day and buy it. You had to sort of create a process to buy it. Right, so before 2000, the only guys who had projectors were corporate organizations. Right, and the first time we saw a projector at a quiz, right, was when Arun Hirigange and Uchinto Sharma, right, brought a projector from Motorola, where they used to work, to KQA, to Delhi Memorial Hall for a quiz. How do they do that? They did that by creating one fake meeting, right, of some kind. Now, they won't get into trouble for it now, so I can reveal it, right? So they said it's needed for a kind of training program, meeting, interaction, etc. And they had a kind manager, so he said, okay, as long as you take it out only on a Sunday afternoon and return it by this time on a Sunday evening, it shouldn't impede normal Motorola functioning in the week, right? So they brought it once or twice like that. I remember this because at the end of the quiz, one of them had to go drop it back at the Motorola office, and I was usually the guy who didn't have a vehicle. So I would sit at the back holding this projector and we would go and put it back, right? But this beautiful project died very fast because some HR manager in Motorola discovered that there was a customs rule forbidding the shifting of the projector outside the building space to which it was assigned. So he said, no, you can't take it out. So that was it, right? And anyway, what did people do with the LCD projector? They showed visuals, right? The idea of using PowerPoint didn't take off, right? It took a while for it to click that you could integrate all of this, right? The other guys who sort of did this integration were the newly formed organization of those times called Quizdom. It was Movin Miranda, Gopal Kidao, Anishkut Datta, Rajiv Rai. They set up sort of professional, quizzing enterprise called Quizdom. They were one of the first adapters to use PowerPoint, play videos via PowerPoint, right? But even then, right, text had not started happening on PowerPoint. Right? So today your PowerPoint is one integrated, everything of the quiz happens on PowerPoint. It took everyone a little while to get used to that, right? So only by around 2001 had that started happening. But KQA was a slow adapter of this whole LCD projector revolution, the PowerPoint revolution, because of one simple reason. We had a slide projector which we had purchased. Right? It was not very expensive, but for KQA that was a big investment, right? And so we were comfortable with that, right? But more importantly, LCD projectors were prohibitively expensive to hire, right? I remember hiring it once for a school quiz that KQA did in 2002. It was called the Anand Memorial Quiz. It was supported by friends of this quizzer called Anand, who had passed away. His friends in the US sent us money to do the quiz. So as part of the budget, we had said, shall we do an LCD projector-based quiz? And they said, okay, go ahead and do it. So we hired an LCD projector. In 2002, when we hired it, it was 1,500 rupees just for the projector. Right, 1,500 rupees was the prize money budget for 3 quizzes. 3 open quizzes, right? So there was no way we could afford it, right? But in the year 2003, something happened, right? There were lots of private operators hiring out projectors, and we came across these guys called Audio Plus who still do our AV equipment for us, right? One had a quizzer friend named Roshan. Right? Roshan knew this guy called Ravi from Audio Plus. I think they went to the same colory class or something. So Ravi told Roshan, I'm going into this business. And since I'm going into the business, I'm going to be sort of offering it at a competitive price. So Roshan told me, and I asked how much will it cost. And he said he's willing to give the projector alone at 750. If you want, nobody had laptops those days, right? Only the corporate guys had laptops, right? And if you want a desktop to come with it, he'll charge you another 250 bucks, right? So we used to get one huge ass CRT monitor and one, one CPU and all of that, and run quizzes. The first few KQA quizzes were run like that. One desktop would be sitting in the middle of the quiz, and the quiz master would run the PowerPoint thing off the projector like that. And eventually that pricing became something we could afford, right? And that's how one big change happened in the way we did quizzes, right? So this relationship with technology, right? That thing has sort of changed quizzing in a very big way. And so no history of quizzing in Bangalore, quizzing anywhere in India is complete without talking about how PowerPoint became one savior of, one enabler of so many different things.
Professor, speaking of all these changes, you're one of the few people who's like there are of course many people, but you're one of the people who has actually seen all of this happen. So this sort of gives credit to a certain expression I heard in quizzing circles. Are you familiar with this expression? So I've heard one quizzer actually quote saying "Arul Mani ki Jawani mein." Have you got? Has anybody spoken about this expression to you?
Okay, I just heard the phrase "Arul Mani ki zamane mein." The line is a little faint.
Yes.
Right? So what about Arul Mani ke zamane mein?
I've heard like quizzers actually say like.
You heard this expression?
Yes. Once I was talking to a fellow quizzer. I shall not reveal. I was like, dude, why are that is another phenomenon why Bangalore quizzes don't start on time. That's a different thing. Why aren't quizzes starting on time? And he was like, they used to start on time. Arul Mani ki Jawani mein, like when Arul Mani was young. So have you ever? Has anybody ever used this expression with you? Like in your youth, it must have.
I've never heard the expression, right? Though KQA quizzes starting late, I must confess, was already happening by the time I took charge, right? And it happened for a specific reason, right? In the Mulki days, quizzes would never start late, right? And that was because Winco would have only one quiz on that day, right? So there was an open quiz, there was only an open quiz, right? It would start at 2 as scheduled. So there was nothing before and nothing after that, right? So when you have that kind of scheduling, you can afford to start on time, right? But the thing that was different from Winco's time compared to our time was that hall hires had become super expensive, right? So in the 80s, Bangalore was a small, sleepy town, right? In the 90s also. But by late 90s, 97, 98, Bangalore had become IT city, which meant that getting halls was just super expensive. Right? Everyone was doing placements, motivational talks, this, that, and all these guys had money. Right? And the guys who controlled this kind of real estate knew that there was money to be made. So voluntary organizations like ours just got beaten by this kind of thing. Right? And so when we made a hall booking, right, it was expensive, it was hard to get, and so we had to pack the schedule with as many quizzes as possible. Right? So Daily Memorial Hall, which we used to hire starting from Winco's times. In Winco's times, he started paying a rent of 500 rupees. Right? By the time all of us started organizing quizzes, Daily Hall had not gone up very much. It had gone up to about 1,000 rupees. Right? But it was difficult to get bookings at Daily Hall on a Sunday because it was in great demand. Right? So when we got a booking, we had to quickly put 3 quizzes in. right? So the moment you have 3 quizzes in a Sunday, right, your any idea of punctuality goes for a toss, right? Because first quiz has to start on time, end on time. By small miracles, that is possible. But after that, everything is out of your control, right? Because quizzes take time to finish, right? People have to go have lunch and come and all of that. And so quizzes would drag beyond their scheduled time a lot. So this happened in my zamana, right? So, but we were more able to start things on time in those days, right? Now it's in fact, we've had to sort of try and rationalize the KQA schedule in such a way that we can go back to that old thing, right? Since we don't depend only on booked venues anymore, we've tried to sort of get back to a more relaxed schedule, right? But this Arul Mani ke Zamane Mein is actually a kind of play, I think, on a quiz that Ochinto and I came up with sometime in the year 2007 or 2008 called Abba ke Zamane, right? It was a quiz. The first time we had Abba ke Zamane Mein, the title Abba ke Zamane Mein was a play, right? Abba meaning your father's time, but also Abba because we wanted it to be a quiz on the 1970s, right? So it started out like that. Then the next time we had it, we made it Abba ke Zamane Mein and we meant the 80s. And then we did one Abba ke Zamane Mein on the 90s. Then we went back to the 70s. Then one year we had 70s, 80s, 90s. So this quiz was a bit of an item. Everyone found it incredible that people would be interested in something like this, right? It was a very niche kind of quiz. So well, I've never heard of the expression Arul Mani ke Zamane Mein. It probably comes from this quiz, Abba ke Zamane. It hasn't happened after 2011, right? But obviously, yeah.
Right. So my question is about setting of questions. So what is your approach towards setting a question or a quiz? So what are some key points you keep in mind while setting a quiz? Is what I would like to know.
Okay. I'm not any kind of expert on this subject, right? I approach quizzing from the point of view, setting a quiz from the point of view of trying something out, right? And so for me, every question is an attempt. I have no idea about how it's going to work actually, right? You may think you know your audience and you may say, okay, this question will go down well, but despite all your prep and all your effort, the question can bomb, right? So those things are unpredictable. That's one thing I've learned. So I've learned to sort of not worry about it too much, right? But to go it in the spirit of it's an attempt. Some things will work in a quiz. Some questions will work. Some questions will not work. Some questions will work after you've tried it once, right? You'll figure, okay, this is why it didn't work. Maybe it has to be reformulated or asked in a different way, etc. Right? So that's like a work in process, right? So you arrive at the correct way of asking a question sometimes after 2 or 3 tries at asking it, right? So I've seen that happen quite often. Right? So I don't put too much anxiety into this idea of a perfectly balanced quiz. I don't think that is possible at all, right? But what I try to do is sort of try my best not to repeat questions, right? As I grow older, that's harder to achieve, right? Because my own reading grows more concentrated. It's not as wide ranging as it used to be when I was younger, right? But one thing I've learned to do is to sort of not think of the quiz in terms of, if I ask this question, Anustuk Datta will know it. If I ask this question, Mitesh will know it, right? So that becomes the default mode in which quizzes are set, right? So I've learned to sort of move away from that and think of it in terms of what will some new guy, right? What will his experience or her experience be if they are attempting this question, right? So that's the big learning what comes naturally to you is, okay, these guys are going to come, they'll know this. So I have to make sure my question doesn't become cheap, right? This is the standard anxiety of anyone who's setting a quiz, right? So to learn to move away from that and to think of it as being equally challenging for everybody, right? That is the thing I've tried to move towards, right? But I can only say I've tried because every question is an attempt, right? I tried to sort of work on the wording of the questions, right, and not sort of set the question around a factoid, right? Because people are obviously prepping like mad for quizzes nowadays, right? People are not quizzing out of a sense of reading and that sort of thing. It has become so serious that people are actually prepping for quizzes. And so if you're going to sort of build it around a fact where you say this and the quizzer is completing your sentence, right? It's no fun for anybody. And so a certain amount of deviousness comes into play in terms of making the question something that can be worked out, right? And so that's something I think is important if you're trying to keep quizzing as open as possible. But the problem there is that, right, the newbie, the person who's coming to a quiz for the first time, has to learn to sort of see that even though the quiz question sounds difficult, it's actually something you know and can work out, right? There's a bit of a learning curve that is kind of steep for someone who comes immediately. And that, unfortunately, we are stuck with. That learning curve, that curve of experience is going to be steep either way. If you set straightforward questions, the new guy who's going to come is going to feel obliterated because everyone is faster than them, right? If you do the other thing that slows everybody down, they'll say, oh my God, this is difficult, I can never do it, right? So it becomes a kind of persistence game, right? Only the guys who are hooked enough to persist and try are going to sort of stick with quizzing. This is something I've again learned to make my peace with, right? The idea that you can set a quiz that will be immediately and instantaneously interesting to everybody, right? It's a great idea in theory, but it's much harder to achieve in practice, right? So to come back to your question, what you try to do with a quiz, right? Ochinto once talked of these 3 B's of quizzing, right? Breadth, balance, and beauty, right? That your quiz should not be confined to 1 or 2 favorite zones, right? That's a good principle, I think, right? You should be learning new things. You should be reading up things away from your own specialization as much as possible. And that makes for fairer quizzing if you're able to spread your questions across as wide a field as possible, right? And then the idea of balance, right? So breadth and balance are kind of slightly contradictory things, right? You're aiming for as wide a spread, but also making sure that you're trying to sort of divide it equally between different kinds of emphasis. The third mystical thing that he talks of is beauty. Whether you're familiar with that area, that question, that idea, that fact, whatever, when you hear the answer, you should feel a little bit of a wow, right? That something like this is true, etc. Right? Those are very well articulated ideas, and I don't have those ideas at the back of my head. My own job is when I'm setting a quiz is to make sure I'm not repeating stuff, to make sure that it's not only playing to the experienced quizzer gallery, that it's including other people as much as possible, right? And to offer a challenge, an equal challenge as much as possible.